what this is mapping out here. This is the current permitting process for the building department in the town of Rye. If you as a resident or you as a contractor want to come in and either get an electrical permit, plumbing permit, fence permit, roof, pool, mechanical, whatever it is, you apply for a permit. What this basically shows you is just two possible examples. We're looking at either a commercial or a multifamily home or a 1 or 2 family duplex. There are other kind of subsets here, but we're looking at just 2 options. If you have a commercial property or you have a residential 1 or 2 family property. What you're really looking at here is a multi-step review. So submit the application. There's a couple contingencies here. If it's a quick approval for just simply swapping out a couple switches or lights in your house, simple electrical work, you can get a quick approval, get your permit, pay for it, and it's issued to you. But there's obviously a more complex process here if you're starting to do full additions, or if you're talking about from foundation up, where if you're putting in septic, you would have to get DES approval. If you give me an example here, guys. What would a fire department approval or signature need to be for?
Sprinkler system.
Sprinkler system, something to that effect. If you start to develop subdivisions, there would need to be planning board approval, zoning board approval. So it's a very extensive process. What it really is designed to show, and what the goal was for this 3-day presentation, was to take this entire paper process currently that has 38, 40 file drawers, whatever, in the basement, probably 500,000 pieces of paper, and put that eventually into a completely electronic or digitized process. So right now, every time an application gets filled out, supporting documentation gets filled out, all of that is paper. Multiple copies of that paper gets made, and eventually all makes its way downstairs into a history file or an archive file for that given property. So what they're talking about doing is trying to, one, digitize the application process, and then also put into electronic storage, not paper storage, that actual history file, which could have a couple thousands of pieces of paper in it. So pretty extensive. What we broke down to is the current state of the entire paperwork process, and then we came off with a couple things. So customer improvement was the #1 objective here. So we said the biggest issue that they often identified was that you had incomplete applications. So we said if there was a way for, whether it's electronic or put it on the back of the paper application, if we could do some sort of job action sheet. We could say, if you are a contractor in town and you're going to come in, you need these 14 supplemental documents before your application can even be viewed. If you don't have it, it automatically gets returned back to you, or it goes into a pending file. So we figured out that there were some steps, whether it's an electronic or a paper process, that we could do to try to not only cut down the entire cycle time of the project, but also make it an easier process for the customer to ultimately get that certificate of occupancy here. We talked about, if you did some of these job action sheets, given the different route here, you could cut rework by 50%, 25%. So just a simple one-step thing on the back of that 1-page application, listing out those 14 documents that they need for a new septic system would automatically cut down 30 to 50% of the rework time, which is extensive considering you're only talking about 3 people pretty much doing that, 2 building inspectors and an administrator. So that was what this is kind of identifying. Like I said, I just threw in a bunch of mumbo jumbo there to make it sound a little bit better than probably what I know, but that is my understanding as to what we're looking at here. Is that correct?
Yeah, you do a great job.
In 4 minutes, Ryan, you are amazing.
So, below you, ma'am, what's your name?
Michelle.
Michelle. Below Michelle is what we started to map if we were to move towards a completely electronic process from start to finish. What would kind of that IT solution look like? So if we were to pay a contractor and the town had approved us, here's $60,000, call BMI Industries and have them develop a program for you for, once again, not dealing with the storage of that paperwork. We're talking about the application process. This is what we were kind of looking at here. So a way for the public to be able to view those 400,000 pieces of paper in the basement on some sort of an intranet system that the fire department chief could look at, the police department chief could look at, conservation could look at, in addition to you as the homeowner. So this is kind of mapping out that process there. We have a couple branch off Kaizens, but same idea. If you look at the left, the public, member of the general public submits the application. There would be kind of a tier drop down there for the type of building permit, whether it was a septic, whether it was a fence, a roof, start to finish for some sort of a new addition or expansion on a property. Then same deal, if you have a residential or a commercial multifamily, up top there's a building inspector, a BI review, and then it goes to all those departments, subsets that we talked about before. But once again, that is solely, kind of working on that $50,000-$60,000 blank check going to whatever that IT company was to try to do that solution for you. Big thing we identified though was that right off the bat, it's a little bit harder to get the $50,000-$60,000 approval. It's much easier to maybe ask for $100 or $1,000. So what we said, something that could be done immediately, was if you advertised an internship or got some sort of part-time help, you could deal with the 400,000 paper copies in the basement first. If you bought a $3,000 plotter and you bought a $1,000 scanner, could you bring in some part-time help? Because the building administrator is doing all of the permits under the sun. We don't have a separate electrical inspector, a separate mechanical inspector. So it's just two people doing 15 type of different inspections. So if you had a way to have somebody separately go through that file archive and start to make sure all the paperwork lines up and eliminate some of that redundancy, then if further down the line you had that $50,000 or $60,000 blank check written to you, then you could just copy over everything that you verified over here via that part-time intern and then turn it into whatever $50,000, $60,000 fully electronic database that you contracted with. But a lot of moving parts here, a lot of subsets, but generally speaking, did I
Did a great
at least
job.
sound like what I was
You
talking
did
about?
awesome.
Yeah,
Take
very
it
much
back.
so.
Way to go,
And I
Ryan.
invited this other team to play the role of a select board if you wanted them to, and they could ask you likely questions.
Okay, we'll try that if you'd like. But some, let me just say a couple big things that we could do. Easy to do, big improvements. We have a few people that we could directly reach out to. I think we said Chuck used to work in Hampton where they did this process. They didn't completely eliminate the 500,000 paper copies, but they did the electronic program process part. So you have a point of contact there for Hampton, and then there's another close friend who works in Dover. So those would be some immediate local resources that you could reach out to and figure out how that process played through, timelines, etc. We did make a couple specific deliverables and report back dates that we'll follow up on here after. Let's see what else is up there. But public access was a big thing. So right now they have all of that data storage, and if they're scanning those 500,000 copies in the basement, they can put them onto our shared drive or whatever at the state or the town of Rise, town-wide database. But that's not accessible to Mr. Williams as a member of the general public. Legally speaking, if he needs access to those records, is there a way for that to be available to him currently, or is there a better way to make that available to him currently? And that's the idea of moving towards eventually that electronic system that would give access to the fire department chief for his approval, building inspectors for their approval, but ultimately Mr. Williams, who's sitting in his house too. That's
It's
the
a lot
main
of
goal there.
storage space you're gonna need
It is.
for all those files when you
Exactly.
start talking about plans.
Yep. The idea being is if you can expand RAM or something like that and do the bulk of your storage on, the Department of Safety's intranet or internet, file folders there, and then you can use that electronic system to just process new applications. You wouldn't put all of your storage maybe on one database. That's maybe a solution there, kind of parse that out a little bit. But, yes.
Do you have an implementation action to look into that, to see what space or bandwidth you have to add onto whatever existing system you guys use right now, for even if you do like an intern, whatever they scan or digitalize?
Sure.
Do you know how much space, or is there a process to find out how much space you could?
I don't think we
utilize?
talked about direct space. The only thing I know is that we had talked about Portsmouth did this, and parts of their process were extremely efficient, and parts of it Rye is doing better, just because there's obviously a population difference between Portsmouth and Rye. But if they had a digitized process, their gigabytes or whatever would be astronomically larger than Rise probably because just the population difference there.
Right.
So I'm sure just reaching out to Portsmouth or Hampton just based on population would be a first step. But
Yep.
I mean, they know more than I do, so that's kind of the generic answer. But
We have to find an IT source to educate us on what we need for storage and how to implement that.
Right.
that's one big
What
thing.
that 500,000 paper equals digitally, or even a fourth
Right.
of it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yep. And they don't have a isolated IT component. They have somebody who helps out and does hardware, a little bit of software, but that's one of the benefits of maybe doing, 60,000 blank check is you get a IT contingent of that planning team on behalf of whatever that IT company that you contracted. So.
The other question I would have is the secondary question of if you're doing work ahead of an IT department or IT that you buy, making sure you're saving it in a format that they can then integrate within their system
Absolutely.
that they sell you. I think that's another big piece to think about. And
Yep.
it's caught a lot of people off guard.
We talked
they save
about
it all
that.
in this, and then all of a sudden, we don't
Can't
read
use any
that.
of that.
So
Yeah.
now you're doing enormous rework on the other end.
So Rosie can talk about this, but Rosie said that her current system is MGMS,
Yes.
and there was concern as to if we brought in that $60,000 company, whatever the number is, would her records from MGMS be compatible to that? So I believe that is something that we kind of looked over, and I don't know if we have a direct answer yet. Depends
Yeah.
on who you work with, but
Well, I can tell
Yeah,
you,
I don't know.
GHRS to New Hampshire first.
sure.
Okay, it was very scary.
Go ahead.
We also have that specific thing that you're just talking about in paper form
Sure.
still.
Yeah.
So if there was an issue with transferring that over to whatever appropriate, data system we choose, then we do have that in paper form, and that would just become part of more of the paper that has to get, put into the system. So
And then just real quick, up top was the initial draft of what we had done, trying to figure out what that future state would look like. So without getting too much into identifying the start to finish as to what you're paying that IT company for, from going from 39 steps and 12 subsets over here, you're really going to like 6 or 7 steps over here. Without identifying those drop-down boxes, you have the resident or the contractor from home submit that application. There's an electronic job checklist that we had over here in paper form. They submit that application, automatically gets routed through whatever that IT system is to the inspectors and to the department heads for review, IT approval, and then basically produces that permit just like WordPress or something. If you do a class registration now, you automatically get an email that says, "Thank you, Ronald O'Keefe, for registering for XX class. The Fire Academy will be in contact with you in 72 hours. Similar idea there, but 3 steps through an automated process opposed to 39 over here is a worthwhile goal for sure. So.
Thank you, Ron.
Looks like we
Thank you.
certainly have a